Okay. Nice to meet you. Welcome on board, gentlemen. So, very happy to welcome you on this panel on how to manage new and old risks. So, yesterday, when I was preparing this panel, I was wondering why new and old risks? Is the questions. When we talked about AI, it was my point. I decided to, I would say more traditional risks when we are currently facing cutting-edge technology and innovation. And it is the case, of course, for AI, from my point of view. So what are the risks? Big questions. When we see, for example, the big hype, I would say, regarding LLM and the usage of that, because I'm sure here many people are using already LLM. And LLM is a very small part of generative AI, and generative AI is a small part of global AI. Don't forget that. So we are to be vigilant when we consider that. We use something, but what's about data privacy? What's about law? What's about regulations? What's about data security? And what's about ethics? So through this panel, we will pass on these different considerations and aspects of AI. And I'm happy because we will deal continuously during this panel with the duality of innovation versus regulation, AI versus well-being. There's not obvious to connect both. I don't know if you agree, but it's not obvious for me to connect both, but we have to do the connection. So how to do that? And I will be very interested in knowing as well how to collaborate between our countries, I would say, Canada, Italy. Okay, so it is globally the points we will address during this panel, if you agree. So before starting the questions, I'm very happy to hear from you, talk about you, your experience, and after we will continue with the questions. You start, Sébastien?
Okay, maybe,
okay.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I will be brief. I'm a professor in computer science, actually at UCAM, so it's written Gill University, so might be, I'm not on McGill, I'm UCAM, not far from here, and I'm a Canada researcher on the privacy preserving and ethical issue of big data, so it relates a lot to artificial intelligence because people call it the oil of big data, is usually personal data. And I work a lot on privacy and fairness and explainability, which are some of the risks and the important ethical issues that will come in, I'm sure, in the discussion. So.
Sure. Pierluigi?
Okay. Yeah, I miss one line of my affiliation. I am a university professor at the University of Milan of data protection law and artificial intelligence. I'm also the data protection officer of the University of Milan, meaning that I'm looking into the data protection details of each research project of the University of Milan. And I am also the head of, because as you can understand, I have a lot of free time. I'm also the head of data protection and cybersecurity practice area at Studio Chiomenti, which is one of the most prominent law firm in Italy.
Very interesting, because you are covering two aspects very important, ethics and as well. I discovered cybersecurity is a very important point, and we used to forget it. It's very important. So thank you for that. So when we consider, for example, generative AI in the global terminology, particularly LLM usage, for example, we have to consider how is the traceability, for example, of personal data. And when we talk about traceability, it's not one point of traceability. It's from the ideation to the delivery of the solution, passing through the process itself. So data privacy, data security, ethics, we have in front of that some regulations, sometimes only frameworks or best practices. So how to do that correctly? You can talk about your experience. You can talk about your use case you deal with. To manage the regulation frame, I would say, and be sure that it is not hindering, I would say, slowing down the innovation. It seems to be two paces, I would say. So how to deal with that in your experience?
Should I? Okay, I can start.
If you want.
I don't know. So privacy, you're talking about all the new risks. I think privacy is the first issue that is really important. One thing we forget sometimes is we call LLM large language model or sometimes black box model, but actually they are built on personal data, and part of my research and my work is to show that despite the fact that people call them black box because they are hard to understand for human, when you look at their structure, there is privacy attack which make it possible to restore the training data. So for instance, on LLM, people have shown it's possible to extract credit card number or to find documents that have been used to train the model. So I think it's very important to also keep privacy in mind. About also new risk, people have expectation also, for instance, and you're right, like the right to deletion. People start to ask, what if I ask my data to be removed from model? And people are working on what people call machine unlearning, so unlearning your contribution to models. So there is also, I would say, a lot of research and development to do on this aspect. How do you integrate the right to privacy to the new machine learning model? So just to give one example, for privacy, one big trend that people are looking is synthetic data, which is, can you train a generative model to produce data that looks like the original data, but it's not the personal data? And there's a lot of issue because sometimes the generative model might just copy some of the profile of the training data, so you also need to be working on how do you make this synthetic data private, and there is a lot of way to do that, and how do you evaluate the privacy of synthetic data. I'm talking about this example because in healthcare, the ability to produce synthetic data of patients is one way to share the data among institutions without having the privacy issue and privacy risk.
Okay, thank you.
Well, for me, the idea that innovation and regulation are one the opposite of the other is one of the temptation of the artificial intelligence. We had a decision of the Italian supervisory authority who blocked 1 year ago, more or less, the ChatGPT. ChatGPT for Italy was blocked. The IP address to reach ChatGPT was blocked, so you will need a VPN to connect to ChatGPT. And all people rise saying, well, this is against innovation, we are missing the train of the innovation, and so on. To me, is more a problem of design and mindset. And I'm saying this from the perspective of a data protection officer and from the perspective of a legal advisor. The compliance part, which is an important part of an artificial intelligence project, so to say, is an essential part, is part of the design. What I see is that usually an artificial intelligence project starts with strong technical analysis, and at some point they try to put the compliance part on top of the project, which is more or less at the end of the design. This is not possible. Because, of course, the compliance part requires some assessments, some documents, some identification of parties, consortia, and so on. And if you try to rebuild the project, of course, this costs twice the price if you involve the compliance part before. This is why one of the, two of the norms that are inside the Artificial Intelligence Act requires first a strong AI literacy. AI literacy means to understand not only the technical but also the regulatory part of artificial intelligence. And the second one is the need of an artificial intelligence officer. So again, an expert who can intervene into the development of the project and suggest what are the possible ethical and regulatory impact of that project. To my experience, if the technical, ethical, regulatory part starts together, the project can follow the exact timeline without any further issue. There are some also regulation in Italy that will improve the possibility to use the data for research purposes. So also the regulators are looking to remove barriers that can slow down the development of artificial intelligence. I apologize for my voice, but as you know, the weather is slightly different between Italy and China. So this is my point of view and my personal view. I think that if we think about the regulatory part not like a compliance exercise, but as a design exercise of the artificial intelligence project, I think we remove this idea that innovation is against regulation.
If it's perfect, it's music to my ears, because during your intervention, Pierluigi, I was thinking about an experience I had, and I was smiling, because when I talk about multidisciplinary is the best way and the mandatory way to do AI, I did have this discussion with a team, and the answer was, of course, we are multidisciplinary, okay, and what are the profiles in your team, within your team you have? And the answer was data engineers, data scientists, software engineers. We are multidisciplinary. Okay, guy. It's not exactly the point. And it was awful, because always, and I was very interesting with the previous panel, because AI is not IT. AI is business. First, we answer a business need. If not, it's the best way. Ignore the compliance, ignore the business lines, ignore the legal part, ignore whatever. It's the best way to slow down innovation. So at the beginning of the project, we have the complete team with different profiles. And it is hard. It's not easy, because it's not exactly the same language, but we have to connect everybody from the TO of the project. So completely agree. And are we, just a question, are we able, I'm seeing you, Sébastien, because you are in Montreal, but the same for Italy. Are we able now to start projects like that, with identifying all the stakeholders, be able to gather all these profiles and do well a project? Are we able to do that? Or it's still an IT way when we are starting a project? Question for you both.
Well, okay, I can continue. So I think the operationalization of all this ethical issue is still something difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, I know some pilot project, but I would say, as it was saying, having security, privacy, and ethics from the beginning is really important. And one of the issues I would say is that a lot of companies would sign an ethical charter. But when you look in practice what they do, sometimes it's not a lot. And I mean, it's also depends, because I would say partly in terms of education, I think we need more ethics training for people doing the technical side. But as you mentioned, we also need to recognize that the team need people from ethics or from law to also be in the process from the beginning, as you were saying. So I think it's still, I would say, an issue. So I see some pilot project that exists sometimes.
Yeah.
But in particular, for the fairness, which is another ethical aspect, if you don't include stakeholders or people that are from outside the technical domain, they might not. So people which are data scientists will focus on accuracy of the system as the main metric. But if you have people from different disciplines, they might say, okay, there might be other issues. For instance, is there different rates of positive decision for men and women, or is the race having enough impact on the prediction? And also, if we want, I think, AI system to work, especially we are talking about AI Act, and for the level of requirement, which is a high impact decision system, explainability is also very important, because if you go to a bank, for instance, or even going back to the health domain, if you have a prediction which is done to a doctor by a system, and the doctor has been told, this is a very accurate system, it's better than the 10 most expert in the domain, it's very difficult for them to challenge the decision. But if you have some explanation about the decision, they can decide, okay, this seems to be reasonable, or I don't agree with it, or in other settings, if you want human to challenge the decision, explanation is very important also, because if you, taking a different example, if you go to a bank, your loan is refused because of a prediction of a system, and you have no explanation, what can you do to ask for a redress, or what can you change to your financial status? So.
In Italy, is the same, Pierluigi?
Yeah, in Italy, it's the same. To my perspective, is a problem of language, you know, between the different parties. And McLuhan used to say, my language is the boundary of my world. We need to remove this boundary, so we need people that are able to work together. This is important from different perspectives that involves AI. The first is the idea to create an AI with a multilateral team, where multilateral means multilateral by gender, by religion, by everything, just in order to address each possible bias of the system. And the other is multilateral by competencies. So to have all competencies working together from the beginning and designing the project. I think it's important. We are still moving on this.
Okay.
But the first step is to have people able to speak with the other. Because if you have a lawyer that is not able to understand what the technical part is explaining, so the meeting takes hours. This is
the same year. But yes, it's the point. Thank you for that. Okay. And you talk about AI Act, Sébastien, and it is a question because finally we are facing, whatever the country we belong to, it's the same. We have the same challenges and we have the same goals. The goals, the major and the main goal is to operationalize AI, okay? Without being used by technologue, I would say. It's AI is in production and it's a question of truthworthiness. We believe in and we use it, okay? But we have some differences. We have the AI Act in Europe coming in force. Here we have some frame, I would say, not exactly the same. So what's about a potential, I don't know if you agree, but a potential normative asymmetry if we want to collaborate together, and we want. What's about these potential asymmetry? How to deal with, is it a problem? Is it not a problem? Is it an opportunity to have some feedback finally? Or it is difficult really to collaborate when, for example, we have Italian companies who want to work with Canadian companies, Quebecois companies.
Do you want to start first?
I start.
Maybe.
Okay. This is the example of collaboration, you see.
Yes.
Okay, let's start. And I start with the good news. I don't want that this is the panel of the bad news after we hear all the wonderful things comes out the regulator and we start complaining.
Thank you.
So I think that Italy and Canada and Europe and Canada has really a common background and a common view, especially on data protection. Canada is a model of data protection. Both all the European countries and Canada are parties of Convention 108 Plus of the Council of Europe, and some of the provision of the Canadian law, as far as I know, are quite the same for the data protection part of the European Union. So I think we have a common ground where we can build this kind of relationship and this kind of regulation. The Artificial Intelligence Act actually is a framework, is not the definitive law, and it still need to be added with several laws. First, domestic law. And we are discussing now in Italy a domestic law on the regulation of artificial intelligence, which introduce a lot of interesting points that are part, just by chance, of the Pan-Canadian strategy on artificial intelligence and of the strategy of Quebec, mainly the capacity to attract talent, to keep talent, and to develop with funds, with exemptions, and so on, to the development of artificial intelligence. So my first suggestion is don't look only at Europe, but look also at the domestic legislation, because all the states are moving in this way, of course, in the, in the space that is left by the Artificial Intelligence Act. The second is that we are waiting for Delegates Act that will complement the Artificial Intelligence Act. First are the guidelines of the authorities that will be identified for the Artificial Intelligence Act. In Italy, the authorities are two. The first is AGID, the authority of Dr. Nobile, who spoke before, and the second is the National Authority for Cybersecurity. Okay, these are the two authorities. They didn't publish anything yet on artificial intelligence, but of course we expect something that will be published and will be more clear as an application of Artificial Intelligence Act in the Italian landscape. The second are the standards. Standards are quite an important point, and Europe now is moving in identifying or developing the standards that are needed for artificial intelligence. And why standards are important? Because standards, of course, when they are shared among countries, are a facilitator to identify the shaping of the artificial intelligence project, and to be sure to remove any possible doubt on the compliance of a process or of a single project. So I think this is the way we are moving. I am optimistic on this, and of course events like this are quite useful to bridging the gap between providers, deployers, producers, and also regulators. The presence of such prominent political representatives, I think it is important, because still we need to speak the same language.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering, it's difficult to do the connection between, it was the first point I mentioned at the beginning of this panel, innovation path and regulation. So we understand that there are many things happen from the regulation side, but innovation is continually providing some solution. When we look at, for example, I come back to LLM, ChatGPT, how to connect that, because the solutions now are not completely compliant with a potential regulation. So how to do that? If I have a look from the technical level, I would say that we are doing compensation. We are imagining some box after black box to try to define the explainability of the AI, the transparency of the AI. It's compensation. Okay? It's better if it is in the tool from scratch, I would say. So how to connect that? How to be sure that the next cutting-edge technologies and solutions are able to demonstrate, prove, give some evidence of the compliance of the regulation? It's hard, huh, as question.
So maybe I can try to answer that quickly. So first, coming back
Courage.
also to the question before, I would just want to say, I mean, that the situation in Canada is complicated because you have the provincial and federal levels. So at the provincial level in
Yes.
Quebec, the data privacy law was changed, was updated not long time ago. I think it can be expected that there will be also some AI regulation. At the federal level, there is discussion for law which is not sure to be passed, so it depends
Yeah.
on the
The
political landscape.
C27, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for innovation, I think it was already said, one thing I think is important is having standard, but not standard only in the technical sense, standard where all the stakeholders come together. In particular, for fairness and explainability, which are 2 points that I mentioned, I think it's very important to be context-dependent standard, in the sense that when you provide explanation, you don't provide the same explanation in the health domain or in the mobility domain. You don't provide the same explanation. It's for a developer or for an end user. Even for fairness, with side studies, there is a million ways to define fairness. If you would explain to somebody, they all make sense. But for the finance domain, there will be a different notion of fairness. So I think having the standard being set by stakeholder and representative of the civil society, as well as company and academics, is very important in all these contexts. And I think for ethical AI and responsible AI, there is a need also of global regulation, but there is also the need of locally having specific, so maybe the standard for fairness in Quebec is going to be different from Alberta, or maybe the federal level can set some basic rules, but then the province can have their own specific legislation. So I think this is also very important, to be local with stakeholder and to think in advance also when you start the technology and not wait until the end, which was already mentioned before.
Thank you, Sébastien.
Well, to my perspective, what you mentioned is a typical problem of the difference of speed between technology and law. And this is not the first time that we see this. How can we manage this? Well, law comes with principles, and this is one thing that people working in the regulatory part has clear in mind, while people working in the technical part becomes crazy when you hear, well, you have the principle. What principle? I don't know how to apply this principle. But principles are important, because when you follow the principle, I mean, it is possible to argue that you are not going against regulation. So you are not depressing, you are not, just embracing the road of the innovation, leaving the regulation. And what are the, at least for the European part, what are the principles that for the regulator are quite important? First, the mapping. Analyze your system and identify what are the risks, but the risks related with human beings. I was in a conference with more or less all the banks of Italy, and they said that they are using a lot of artificial intelligence, but just to enhance the internal process. They are not using process of artificial intelligence related with the clients, because they are still not sure if they were able to map the risks of use of this application of artificial intelligence for clients, customers, and so on. And this is a first step. We need to know where to stop, okay?
It's a kind of critical mindset, I would say, to develop.
Yeah.
It's very important, because if we are waiting for the regulation and the perfect frame, forget your wish to do an AI solutions. So if I wrap up the different contribution, and thank you for that, it was very interesting to have you both perspectives, because you are from different domain of expertise. It's to be sure that everybody from the kickoff of the project and the ideation first is gathered and present at the table. It's very important to develop your critical mindset, to be sure that you are analyzing correctly your risks and have a kind of mitigation, even if it's not perfect, it exists first. and consider the regulation when it exists is the best way to do something that will be operationalized at the end, because it's what we want. We don't want, never, I would say now, it's time to have a clear, operationalized solution, AI-based, in the hands of no-technologue people. So I love this critical mindset. We are here. And if the regulation is very clear, at the moment where it is clear, embrace it, I would say. But thank you for that. It's perfect. I hope that you already both identified some opportunity to collaborate, Canada, Italy, because I want to. So I hope it's the case. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're on time. Bravo, messieurs. Thank you.